Dun, dun, dun,
Perfect
dun.
music, right? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mr. A, with my partner.
Sally Sasson in the building. Corona free.
And as you know, this is the set 6145. Woo! Tonight, we have a very special guest, Mr. Gerald Alexander Lopez Castellanos. I hope I didn't wrangle his last name. But Mr. Castellanos is going to be sharing, he's giving us the nod because it's Black History Month. And Mr. Castellanos is not only going to be sharing Black history, but I would say Afro-Caribbean history as a main point of discussion. And salute to our brother Charlie, Mr. Joseph Estrella, for making the connection, and not only that, helping me to sort of correct that. But we're gonna be jumping all over the place. But this is gonna be an amazing discussion, and I hope that everybody is gonna be tuned in and in tune with the topics that are gonna be shared. You're gonna be learning a lot, so pay attention.
Take it all in.
Yeah, this is really gonna be a good one. This guy is super knowledgeable. Not only that, but wasn't he just like sharing screenshots and slides and
Yeah. This is a history lesson for everybody here. It's like a what are those college courses?
not even a TED Talk.
Yeah. So everybody sit tight. He probably doing the majority of the talking tonight because we want to hear it too. We want to hear all his knowledge. He's definitely not a guy we picked up off the street. He's a guy that knows what he's talking about, and we're gonna ask our questions, and we expect you guys to ask some questions in the chat. Let's get busy.
For sure. Before we start, just salute to Cousin Jen Rosario. I see you, Mr. Johnny Chavez. A new face in the room, Miss Annie Moreno Breton. That's how it's pronounced?
Breton.
Okay. Breton. The Chef Jay Martinez, we see you, brother. Miss Shanna Brown, we see you as well. Good evening, everybody. Are we going to run the track and then do announcements, or you want to do announcements and run the track?
Let's do announcements real quick.
Let's start off on a light note. Today, I want to give a salute and a happy born day to a friend to the show, Mr. Ronald Childs. Mr. Ronald Childs is the owner and proprietor of Rima Soul. Rima Soul is out in Arizona, and look at this line.
Food truck.
They had a brick and mortar. They shut it down. They went food truck. Yo, they from New York City, from I believe the BX. Ronald and his wife Via Childs. There you see her there taking everybody's orders. But Ronald's in the kitchen chefing it up. Via's out front. They look at those lines, bro. It doesn't stop. It does not stop. But I wanted to say happy born day to Mr. Ronald Childs, friend to the show. I hope you have a good one, brother. We support, as you know. And
they're importing that New York order because you know how it is. When you go out of state, the food ain't the same.
No, it's definitely not.
It hit different. That New York water got that fluoride.
For sure. Somebody was talking about that earlier today.
We was talking about that the other day.
Pizza? It was the pizza discussion, right?
Yeah, he had Jamaican food or something.
Yeah.
But when you go, anywhere, the bagels, the pizza, all that, because that water hit different,
It's funny because in Florida, there's a spot that I go to when I get out there to go visit my daughter or whatever. Basically see family. And there's a spot in Florida by Port St. Lucie. They import New York water to make their bagel.
Yeah, a lot of places do that now.
And it's, the line, you thought that line was crazy. The line is bonkers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, salute. A happy born day to Mr. Ronald Childs. Salute to you. And all the best on what you do, brother. We see you out there doing big things as always.
I went to the dentist out here in Long Island, and they was like, there's no fluoride in the water out here.
Really?
Not in the city. In the city, it's fluoride. That's why they be having them yellow meth teeth and shit. Like, I'm like, all right, I got it.
Meth mouth.
Drink water, he spit lemonade.
On another note, a more somber note, today is the anniversary of the assassination of the good brother, Malcolm X, Malik Shabazz, El Haq Shabazz. it's sad that we come to find out, that there's more information coming out about his assassination and who was involved. But today's the anniversary, and a great human being and somebody who evidently over time went through such a transformation and an evolution, and his name should be respected and heralded by everybody. And not only that, but this is the only picture I like to share of him, because to me this speaks to people in this moment. Take it how you want to, but rest in peace to Mr. Malcolm X. Alrighty, a little serious there, but
things will always come out, like with Malcolm, with Kennedy. Years later we'll still be finding stuff out. So
it's crazy. And even with the movie Judas,
I didn't watch it yet.
I haven't watched it yet. I've been holding off, but I've been getting the music drops. Fred Hampton was murdered by the government, but plain and simple, there's no hiding it. Like, it's open information. And the mere fact that the government can, run programs like this, like COINTELPRO, which was used to ultimately murder him, is it such a stretch why people of color and Black people specifically never trust the government? And it's funny to see now how these other folks, are all conspiracy theoried out. It's a funny show to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's just me. We didn't give flowers to this gentleman, but we're going to right now because, we can't let this slide. So we want to say happy belated birthday to our GOAT, Mr. Michael Jeffrey Jordan. We missed it the other day, but, we come back around to it, and we want to salute our GOAT, the original GOAT in my mind, Air Jordan. Don't get it twisted.
R.I.P. Prince Marky D too.
Ooh, see, thank you for reminding me, brother. Are they all? Is it all? It's all of them now, right?
I don't even know, bro. Honestly,
I know Buffy was the first one to pass away.
I'm sure he was the lightest of the three, so he probably
and the light skinned did this stuff.
That too.
And finally, on a more comedic note, on a more lighthearted note, today I was having a shitty day. I was telling my partner here, I was having a real shitty day. But I always seem to find that when I watch this brother's work, I just enjoy myself. So salute to Crime Faces, man, for always doing his thing. I could watch one of his videos. To the ring of things.
Burchelt, Valdez, Linguini legs.
Are you hearing that sound?
Yeah, we hear.
Out of ropes, all smoke, every round. Bang, bang, get down. But it led to this. Some call it the KO of the year. You know the motto, hands down, man down, Bonza! Caught him with the Our Lady Guadalupe, say la vie. Tucked him in. This was nice. He came from downstairs.
All right, I don't want to drag that out.
Yeah.
I was coming home. I saw
he's in works. He's been talked to, so gotta get him on here.
Yeah. And I watched the video and I just felt better. Something about listening to Crime Faces just makes me feel better. So you got something else, brother?
Nah, Johnny Chavez said Kool Rock-Ski's still alive. So
Kool Rock is still alive. I thought he had diabetes.
Yeah, so stop killing people, bro.
Nah, listen, who was the other one that was killing his wife? Chris, right? From Greece.
Yeah.
OJ?
Yeah. But no, I'm good, man. I got nothing else. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's start the show. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. I am your host, Mr. A, with my partner,
Sally Sassong in the building, Corona free.
And this is the set 6145. Tonight, we're giving the nod to Black history, or as I was told, in proper context, we're going to be discussing Afro-Caribbean history with a very special guest by the name of Gerald Alexander Lopez Castellanos. We're going to be bringing this gentleman into the room. We're going to have a discussion. I would implore everybody to pay attention, and as the questions come up in your mind, shoot them in the chat, because there's going to be a lot divulged in this time span that we have with him. So without further ado, let's set this up because we want to bring the gentleman in. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the set, Mr. Gerald Alexander Lopez Castellanos.
Hey guys,
Good
how
evening,
you guys
sir.
doing? Doing
How
good. How
you
you
doing,
guys doing?
Gerald?
We're good. We
Right,
are
right.
well. We're very excited to have you on the show. There's so much to cover, and we're gonna try to make the most of all the time that we have with you. So let's start at the very beginning so that people understand who you are. So why don't you introduce yourself, one, and sort of give your not your resume, but your credentials, your education, anything that you can share with them for them to have an understanding of how you've come to acquire this knowledge.
Well, the first thing is to be curious, right? You can't acquire nothing if you're not curious. So
Very much so.
I'm a curious person. That's the first thing. As far as titles and all that, I'm an IT major,
Okay.
right? So I did a computer science, and in the computer science world, you kind of learn that a computer is not just a tool for entertainment, but it's a tool of information, right? So in in that context, for example, is where I got started delving into and part of my curious passions is talking to a lot of older family members. So I'm a big genealogist, for example. I got into genealogy, genetics, and history, right?
Okay.
And specifically, I always noticed that it was a lot easier to look at, for example, Herodotus in Greece and to look at European histories, but it was much more difficult to get a good insight on African histories, right? So that was one thing that always kind of like had me like, like dig more and dig more. And one of my biggest passions, right? The first thing you always do as a person, you always look inside, right? And one of my biggest passions is kind of deglossing the history of what is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, right? So that island has this rich and old history, right? And connecting that to the diaspora and to all the other worlds that connect to it.
Mm. So as discussed before, everybody, first of all, let me just let you know we're having a little issue with your mic. So let's just be aware of it. You're coming in clear now, but let's just try to be aware. Secondly,
Is it a wireless headphones, Gerald?
It's wireless, yeah, so there might be a little bit of a delay.
Oh yeah, it might be
Oh,
okay.
maybe the battery's dying or something.
And he has his own special guest, so don't pay that no mind. We want to listen
That's
to
right.
Mr. Castellanos talk. So one of the
Alright.
things that sort of got my, I wouldn't say it got my attention. It made me think in thinking about today's show earlier. I was writing a bunch of questions down in preparation to having you on, and I have a conditioned response to when I'm speaking about or going to speak about this subject matter, to instantly my reference point goes to slavery. Why? I mean, I know I'm not the only one, but why would that be my instant point of reference?
So that's always a thing that it's an interesting, and we were kind of like thinking about this earlier. Is it depends on how you define it, right? So obviously, when we talk about the modern concept of black, right, we talk about Pan-Africanism, right? When we talk about African histories, it never starts with slavery. No societies, and it's too diverse of a continent. You can't even summarize it into we're the most diverse people on the planet, basically genetically, because it's such a diverse group of ethno-linguistic, social, political. There's really no way to summarize, right? But certainly, there's a little bit of merit to that because the term black starts as a racialization by Europeans, right?
Okay.
It's a term that is picked up and it's kind of like it was the way of Europeans saying, you guys are too complicated. There's too many of you. There's too many different, languages and musics and traditions. So we're just going to call you the same thing. So, and that starts during the time that we start getting picked up during slavery, right? So, specifically, that actually leads to a lot of people think about when slavery starts, right? And it doesn't start in the 1500s. It starts way before that, which I'm going to explain a little bit.
Wait,
So
I'm
to close up,
sorry because I'm sorry to interrupt you because your mic is doing the robot thing again. Would you
oh no,
happen to have a hardwired set to use? Because I
no,
really
you know what? It's going to be It's gonna be good now. The reason why is because there was a conversation
Traffic.
between my cousin and my wife, yeah, and they were
Oh,
talking. So when two people talk on this mic, it does echo canceling, right? I also
okay,
disabled echo canceling on mine, yeah,
okay,
when I
okay,
brought it in. But
okay.
what I
So we
was
got to
saying is
rewind.
that
Yeah, let's bring that back for a second.
okay. So I can put it like this basically is that it depends on how you see it. I first of all, black in the modern term, right? So we're talking about black as in Pan African, right?
Mhm.
Then we're referring to all the societies and linguistic groups in West Africa. It does not start with slavery. No society in the world started with slavery. None, right? And we're a mix of different societies. There's different types of peoples in the continent. Now, the other thing I was saying is though, even though you're thinking is wrong to jump right away to slavery, in a sense, the word black starts with slavery because it's a racialization
Okay.
of peoples who are very diverse, have nothing to do with each other, and are trading and interacting and having normal human being lives, and they're basically we're picked up in this European paradigm of like you guys all have the same skin tone, so we're just gonna give you a category,
Mm,
right? But it's not a cultural category, you know.
okay.
So
So to
that's
make life
basically
easier for
now.
themselves.
mm, Yeah, to make it, but it has a lot to do with ignorance and wanting to feel superior. So it's like,
Right.
oh, all these guys are just the ones over there, on the other side of the planet, or they're from this continent. Now this is everybody here. So that's part of it's an ignorant concept. But like I
Wow.
said,
So
now things change. Like, things change. So nowadays we have a Pan African sort of term, right? That is associated with blackness, which of course does not start with slavery, right? We have a lot of rich societies that have been doing things, trading with, Southeast Asia, and that's how the plantain got to West Africa, trading, right? Yeah, all the plantains we eat in the DR and the Caribbean, that's how we got it. The plantain is not native to West Africa. It came from
really,
Southeast Asia. Mhm.
wow. That's something new to me. I never did you know that, Sel? I didn't know that.
No, I might have heard that before, but it
Mhm.
sounds brand new to me.
So the plantain comes to us through trade, and it's not even native to any
West
not
Africa.
native to Africa or any Caribbean island.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, yeah, it's part of a trade. I don't have the exact dates, but it's part of the trade
Mhm,
with Southeast Asia. That's how
mhm.
rice also gets. And the
Right.
same way that things were coming into African societies, they were also leaving African societies, right?
Right.
What I do have, I heard to talk about the microphone. You guys give me
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
sure.
30 seconds.
We'll
Yes.
put you
Microphone.
in.
I'm
Put
gonna
him in the
put
green
you in
room,
the
and
green room, and when you're ready,
just give the thumbs up.
Green room.
yeah, and we'll
All
bring
right.
you back in. Ladies and gentlemen, we really want to make the most of this conversation, and we
Yeah.
do not want to. That
We
was
apologize for the technical difficulties.
from the guy who works in IT.
Yeah.
Just please sit tight with us. We want to have this conversation. I'm telling you, Gerald he's about his business. So we really want to have this conversation. So just, bear with us. Excuse me. Wow. That was tough. That was a tough listen.
Yeah. For some reason, I feel like I've heard that before about the plantains, but it also feels like brand new, like fresh. But for
Well,
some reason, I feel like I've heard that before.
I'm going to tell you why. The comedian Godfrey was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying, Dominicans, you know why you eat this? Because of us, because of Africa. Now, what he's indicating is it's not native, like it doesn't grow in Africa, but through trade,
Right.
it came to Africa and it became part of the diet. Now, what I find interesting about that is this. If it's not native to Africa and all these Latino countries and islands, and even Jamaica, Barbados, Dominica, every little island you could think of in the Caribbean, they eat plantains. They just, no matter how you cut it, everybody eats it, right? What does that tell you?
That's why all them chinitos on the avenue with the restaurants and shit. If you tell me that,
It's not really Chilean Latino. They've been knowing about that for a minute.
they like,
But
we brought you this shit.
but what I'm saying, what I'm alluding to is this: if it's not native to Africa and it came from China, China's all the way over there. If anybody knows geography, now
I want to know what was going back to China.
Right. Not only that, but now it starts coming to Africa and they adopt it as a part of their diet. Then it spreads out into the Caribbean. That means that there's a connection some way, shape, or form between Africa and the Caribbean in trade, right? That's the only way it happens, by movement. So, thumbs up. Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing him back in the room. Let's
Gotta flame him.
I got a little angel light now with me because I have to use a different camera. How does it sound? You can hear me breathing and shit?
We're good.
Yeah.
The IT guy fixed it.
All right. So where were we?
No, I was going to say it's bad advertisement for Bose. These are Bose 700s and they're not doing a good job at echo.
Están basura, hermano. Okay, so that's a very interesting point of how the plantain came to Africa through trade.
Mm-hmm.
That's a super interesting point. Because that I was telling Sally before you came back in the room, then that means that through movement from Africa out into the Caribbean, that's the only way I can see it happening, because I don't remember hearing about Jamaicans traveling to China for trade, right?
No, I mean, I'll tell you this, right? The thing with anything with trade and all of that, that's a really good field that's developing now, which is a lot of the ancient DNA. And some of these fields, like archaeology mixed with ancient DNA, that type of thing is, the type of thing has a lot to do with, we are looking at things from a perspective now of like going back in time, right? So there might be evidence for this at some point, Absence of evidence doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Absolutely.
And absence of evidence doesn't mean it happened either, right? So we don't know. We just and that's one of the cool things about science and all that, is that you get to discover. Like actually recently, there is, just a slight off topic. They did prove genetically that Polynesians did travel to Peru and came back with natives, and must have taken native women or men and ended up mixing about like 400 years before Columbus. So
I'm glad you said that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be all over the place tonight. So just put your seatbelt on and grab a pen and take notes. So just
ADD history lessons.
Yeah, super ADD history lesson. So somebody said that they found some sort of like turquoise, if you would. I forget which stone it was, but they found this turquoise-like stone in Alaska, right? And what they said was, oh, this stone has been dated 500 years pre-Columbus, right? Now, we can talk about the irony of that statement, because of course Columbus never even made it to New York, let alone Alaska, right? But what I would like everybody in the room to understand, if they don't, Columbus wasn't the first. He first of all, he did not discover America, and second of all, there were indigenous people that were coming to the Americas way before Columbus got here. Am I wrong? Am I off? What do you say to that?
No. I mean, that's what we're seeing genetically. That's what we're seeing anthropologically. And these people have close ties with old Siberia, right? Which is not the same as recent Siberia.
No.
And it's no discovery. I think I had this discussion one time, and this kind of silos into part of Dominican history. When you look at the founding of towns, the word founded is a dangerous word, right? Because it's got a Eurocentric kind of like appeal to it, because you're thinking, okay, like for example, Bani was founded in 17 something, but it wasn't founded then. There were already people there, right?
Exactly.
It was, legally within the Spanish Empire context, yes, but as far as human settlement, that's not true.
Of course.
Right. So there's a differentiation.
Gerald, I want to go back to something before we get into this. You mentioned genetics, right? Are you big into genetics? Like, are you like into telling people like 23andMe or whatever, however that stuff works? Are you into stuff? Because I know us Hispanics and, the blacks, we don't trust the government. You know what I mean? So people think right away they get on a watch list if they do something.
Well, the thing with that is real interesting is that I mean anybody who goes to a doctor, it's already too late, right? If you've been
Yeah.
to a doctor, if you've been stopped by the police, I mean they pulled DNA off a man's coffee cup, and the NYPD did that not long ago.
Yes.
So you have no idea where your DNA is right now. It's not a big deal. A lot of people make it a little bit bigger, and I think the benefit far outweighs the danger
Really?
because of the fact that our histories are so disconnected as peoples, right? Because I mean, for some people, it's just been a long time. I mean, how are you going to find out what happened 300 years ago? You know, most people can't go behind, back before their great grandparents.
Mhm.
So, the benefit of the DNA has a lot to do with you being able to connect things into your line, right? And to connect other peoples and histories that you had no idea ever were part of that, right? And well, actually, the biggest bonus for me, the biggest reward, was to be able to match with West African and even Southeast African cousins, right?
Mm.
That genetically have like a 99.9% probability of being real, right? In other words, you know, so
You didn't know.
exactly, and you can tie them to your family because if you test enough family members, then you can say, oh, this is through this grandfather, or
Wow.
this is through this grandmother, or etc. So then you can start to make sense and piece together a history that was broken up during the slave trade. So the benefit you can get off of that for the future generations is like, I mean, I don't think I don't find myself that interested to be followed by the FBI. So I don't.
There's a bigger picture at play here. Gerald, it's interesting that we sort of curved off into the whole genetic aspect of tracing things back. And this is gonna, again, people, this is gonna splinter off into so many different directions, but we're gonna allow Gerald to take us where he wants to go because he does have specific things that he wants to speak of. But I wanted to put this on the table because this is something that I'm not gonna say I've argued with people, because to me, I feel like the facts are on my side. But I would like for you to clarify for the people that are watching. Were the Irish ever enslaved in the United States?
No, it's a different treatment. I mean, I'm not a U.S. history major, so I can't tell you with 100% certainty. But
Mhm.
I can definitely tell you that it's a different treatment because the thing is, slavery in the New World, right,
Mhm.
has a lot to do with the European aspect of domination, right? So even if the Irish were indentured servants for some time, it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they were going to have the same treatment, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, as a matter of fact, just by the fact that they're called Irish specifically and not white, it's
Exactly.
different, right? For us to be reduced into a color tells you a lot, right?
Yes.
Because once you're reduced into a color, that's I don't know what language you speak. I don't know if you can eat shrimp or not. If it's against your culture, you know. I don't know what taboos you have. You know what religious traditions you have, and all of that. That's all gone once I reduce you to a color. So it has a lot to do with. There's a big difference. It's not really comparable. That there were European indentured servants, there always has been.
Right.
It's nothing new. Actually, that brings me to a point that when slavery starts, right? So when we talk about how does how do West African societies end up uh, in the New World, right? As far as during the times of we talk about like post Columbus, and it doesn't start in 1492. It's not like the Portuguese and the Spanish were just like, oh, let's just go, vámonos pa Sierra Leona a beber café. That's not what they were saying. They were definitely they had been in West Africa for a lot longer than a lot of people think. The Portuguese. This is a quote, and I have it in. I have the book right here actually, which is perfect. This is a good book to get. It's called "The Rise of the Transatlantic Slave Trade in Western Africa," 1300, not 1492, 1300
Mhm.
to 1589. So, for example, in here, they mentioned that Portugal lost half of its adult population reaching West Africa in the 1400s. That's how
Wait.
many Portuguese
Died?
died on the way to Guinea, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria.
And as barco on the boat, they would just
Yeah, I mean because it's a rough sea. The Atlantic Ocean is crazy.
wow.
So it's a rough sea. And why all these people, going there. A lot of them were Sephardic Jews, fleeing Inquisition in Spain and in Portugal. So they said, wait a minute, if I can settle in Guinea-Bissau in 1432, these people don't know that I'm a Jew. They don't care that I'm a Jew, and they're going to be my friends, and we're going to, talk and trade and intermingle just fine. And this is how things start between Europe and West Africa from a seaborne sense. But it doesn't really start there. It starts way into the 1200 when the Moors came into Spain, right? The Moors are a multicultural, multicolored society, right? And they're coming in, all these Muslims are coming in into Spain, and they're interconnecting Iberia with the wider Islamic world, right? And that included, for example, Mansa Musa.
Richest man ever.
Mansa Musa was one of the richest men, or if not the richest man in the world.
Yes.
And in his empire in Mali, and when he built one of his structures, he actually went and got architects from Andalusia in Spain.
Wow.
So he had Spanish men come to his kingdom in, I don't know if it was the 1200s or the 1300s. It's in the book. And they helped build basically these structures that he wanted to build.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
The architects that Mansa Musa brought over from Spain, were they of like Moorish people, or were they just Spaniards?
It's hard. This is the thing. These identities,
Hard to discern.
They're fluid.
Okay.
So there are people who converted into Islam that might have been blood-wise 100% Spanish, and they're still Moors, because Moor is not a race. Moor is not an ethnicity. It has nothing to do with that.
Right.
So there are people that would have been everybody. Would have been anybody in the Islamic world. Of course, most people were of North African and Sahelian and even West African descent, because this was a trade route.
Right.
And unfortunately for some of our folks, this is where slavery starts, because in the trans-Saharan movements, right, you have a trade between the powerful empires like Mansa Musa's and the Almoravids of Morocco. And they're trading gold, they're trading salt and slaves. Right. And not 10 or 5, they're trading hundreds of thousands of people into, as a matter of fact, during Spain and in Portugal and Spain, at the very beginning of during the Moorish Empire, right, when there was slavery was loose, right? So they had people who were coming in from Turkey, people coming in from Germany. It wasn't about color at first. It was just anybody that people could capture who weren't Islamic or weren't, if they were in the north, weren't Christian. And that devolves in time into a color thing, but it didn't start out like that, right? So when we're talking about the early societies in Spain and in Portugal, like for example, there's an Afro-Catholic society called Los Morenos de Sevilla, which later on was called by historians Los Negritos de Sevilla. They changed the name, but these people, a lot of them were folks that were caught up in the trans-Saharan slave trade. These are people from Mali, from North Nigeria, Hausa, people from Senegal, and they were sold up north to Morocco, and then they were sold to Spain.
Why did they change the name?
Why did they change the name? That's actually the second topic, is that one of the ways that the Spanish racializaron, I don't know the word in English, right, is that they started calling people negritos and negros, right? And in their perspective, the people coming in, they were like, no, but I'm a Banyul, or I'm a Biafada, or I'm a Sape. And they were like, no, tú eres un negrito.
Slave.
Yeah, and that started becoming synonymous with time. It didn't start out like that, but it started becoming synonymous. So it was called La Cofradía de los Morenos because the people who founded the fraternity in the year 1300, actually, in the year 1300, the people who founded it, they were free. And since those times, the Spanish had started to use the word moreno for people who were free, right? People who were free and had nothing to do with bondage, born free or freed, which are two different things. But in either way, they would be called morenos, right? And that cofradía, and we see this to kind of connect it to the Caribbean, right? Because we're like all the way in the 1300, kind of like bring you guys a little more forward. In the year, let me see, I have it right around here. In the year 1501, right? In the year 1501, from a free black man, right, a Moreno from Seville called Pedro, was hired to be a servant, not a slave, to be a servant, to go there to dig gold, to Cotuí, in what is now the Dominican Republic. And he came in union style with a work contract, right? He had rights as far as how much he had to get paid, and if he didn't get paid, what penalties his employer would have, and it was stipulated that he would get 5% of the gold that he dug as a bonus.
Wow.
So you have a free black man coming in from Seville in 1501 to Cotuí, modern day Dominican Republic, which was the colony of Hispaniola at the time, basically working like a job with actual job security.
Like a contractor.
A contractor.
Wow. Now, let me ask you a question, Gerald, because there's so many different terms that we're using to describe the people who were enslaved of that time, and there's many different races that we're discussing here. Is there a difference between what slavery was like, let's say from Morocco to Spain, or any different part of that European area or African area? Because it almost sounds like people go from being slaves to free, or there's they're slaves but they sort of like have some sort of individual rights, or can you explain that or get into that a little bit more?
Well, I would add that it's not just different if you talk about Morocco versus, for example, Colombia, right? Or for example, the Spanish Florida or Hispaniola. There's a difference in each colony, because each colony is a project, right? Each colony is technically so it's the same way that if you've ever worked in different companies and different startups, they're not all the same.
Nope.
And it's not always about if it's New York or California, right? So all these colonies had a difference in how they treated people, not as a principle, but as a consequence, right? So for example, the colony of Hispaniola, when it started out, slavery was very harsh in the 1500s and the early 1600s. I mean, the amount of Maroons that we have in the 1500s in the island were really, really high. And the Spanish were so brutal in that time period that there's one episode where they fried the Maroons in oil.
What?
Right.
Those people are sadistic.
Very. So there's different, hold on a second. Give me 1 second.
No, go ahead. And I want to ask them anyway, because you said Maroons. Maroons like Jamaican Maroons. They got the little girl in the room. Salute to Mr. Dubois. I see you.
So, the thing is, it's, the Maroons in that time period, they were very, very heavy, very active, because at that time, as an enterprise, right, slavery was a big enterprise, and the investment they had just done in Hispaniola, was so large. So, the investment was so large that it's the same way that when you work in a hedge fund, right? You work in a hedge fund, and they're literally slave driving people in the big corporations, right? In the hedge funds, because they're making money. So what happens in the colony of Santo Domingo is that devolves with time, right? So at first, 1500s, early 1600s, if I showed you the census of 1540, 1601, it's the same. 99% of the people who were either Africans or Black Creoles were enslaved. Right? 99, basically almost everybody. There were free people like the man who came to work in the mine, but that was a small percentage. So what happens is that changes in the Dominican context. Well, in this case, in the colony of Santo Domingo, that changes because of abandonment. The Spanish basically, this ties a lot into the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, right? After the 1500s, the Spanish are like, wait a minute, there's no gold here compared to like they go to Peru and they see, you know, they look at the Incas and they see all the gold in Peru. They find all the gold in Mexico. They're like, what are we doing in this small island that's hot and humid, right? They're like, they left. So these top kind of like investors all left the building basically. They in the 1500s, all these Spanish left, and when they did, it created a power vacuum, right, where the inhabitants of the island, that 99% that was enslaved, all of a sudden had a chance for freedom, because a lot of the slave masters started to leave, and people had they had less of that white gaze, that vigilance, right, of like, wait, you're not supposed to do that according to this law, because there were a lot of laws. There were laws against people enslaved and laws against free people. That would try to keep them in check. But one mistake a lot of people make is this: when the people look at slave codes or they look at laws during slavery, they're like, oh, in this colony, if you sold a chicken breast or something, you'll be fined or thrown in jail. But who was applying that is the question. It's not about the law.
Who is enforcing it?
Who is enforcing the law? So if you don't have enough people in all parts of that country or society to enforce the laws, there's going to be sections of that society where people are going to go because they know they can't be bullied or questioned. It could be lawless.
There's no obvious.
And that's basically what happens in the colony of Santo Domingo. The colony of Santo Domingo becomes like literally the real Pirates of the Caribbean, like, because that's where all of that stuff starts, like Francis Drake and all of that. And people were basically pirating, especially in the north coast in Montecristi and in the south coast in San Jose de Ocoa. There was a huge pirate society at the time, and that society was trading out tobacco, bringing in goods like rum from other islands and bringing in things from Europe. But also, there was also an importation of slaves coming in.
Time out. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So these people are basically abandoned by the Spaniards. They then have to understand how to form their own society. They form into a society somewhat of pirates, and now they start enslaving people?
They don't start enslaving people, they start trading in slaves.
Right. I'm sorry, that's what I mean. Yeah. They start. Wow.
And the reason, so you would have in those time periods, so we're talking about late 1500s, there were people in there who were still your top of the food chain type of Spaniard. Like Christopher Columbus's grandson was a pirate, right? Luis Colón.
Oh, okay.
He was a pirate, and he lived in Montecristi, in the north coast, and he spent his time financing and buying all these illegal goods. Illegal in that time means you didn't pay the queen or the king some money. You didn't pay your taxes. It's like the IRS, but like in 1595, and you didn't pay your taxes, you were in trouble. If they could find out that you didn't pay your taxes, in that time period. And basically, so what was happening in that time period is you had a society that was very lawless, right? And that gave an opportunity for people who were otherwise highly oppressed and bullied by this enslaving society. It gave them a chance for freedom, right? So, and remember this, they're not really, when you talk about African societies, you're not looking at like, oh, this person that's coming in is also my skin color, therefore I have to treat them better, or there's no, it has a lot to do with ethnicity, right? So especially if you have African-born peoples. There's an episode in Peru like this, right? In Peru in the 1600s, quick snippet. There was a fight between people who were Bran from Guinea-Bissau and Black Creoles. And that fight was because, and my drummer friends that are online, this is kind of funny. It started because when the Brans came from Guinea-Bissau into Peru, they disrespected the Creoles, the Black Creoles, right? And the Black Creoles came back and they stabbed one of the drums. And that made one of the Brans go and stab one of the guys and kill him.
You break my drum, I kill you.
Basically.
Makes sense. Yeah, I knew that.
So,
Wow.
So that was, that's kind of like to get an illustration of what society was like. It wasn't so much about we're kin because we're color. It
Right.
was more about people have these identities based on their culture, on their ethnicity. So it facilitated that, you would have people who were recently enslaved and were now free be part of the crew that was importing West Africans into the island and buying them and reselling them.
So it
And
was, I'm sorry. So,
no, go
so
ahead.
it was more, as I understand how you're explaining it, back then, it was more of, as you say, an ethnicity thing. See, I could be a South African, and Selly can be a West African, and even though we're both from the same continent or country, we don't view each other as equal or even sharing a kinship. It was more about our cultural identities and religious beliefs and practices and things of that nature that would separate us. So, me, either of us enslaving each other, we wouldn't give it a second thought.
No, because these are totally different different societies. I
Mm,
think that as African descendants, right, in the New World, and we get we get this sort of thing where like um we give a lot of slack to Europeans. So, for example, when Europeans had World War II and they were bombing the hell out of each other in Britain and Germany, everybody's like, "Oh, World War II," and it's like, you got people reenacting World War II. So why is it that when we talk about West African societies fighting, right? Then why is this like a big deal when these are people who are not related to each other?
mm,
Sometimes they are. Sometimes, most of the time, they are. They're very different societies, right? They have different taboos, different religious principles, and all of that. So when these things happen, they didn't happen from a perspective of being a traitor or being a sellout or anything. It happens more from the perspective of two people from two different societies having differences, right?
mm.
And these differences were sometimes settled by violence. And a lot of times, no. A lot of times they were settled by diplomacy and trade, because this is what I mentioned before with the
Right,
plantain,
right.
for example. We had people trading plantains, from Southeast Africa to Asia and back. I mean, from Southeast Asia into Southeast Africa. So, hold on one.
Yo, this is a lot, bro. Is it me?
All right,
Yo.
all right. So basically, yeah, like it's you got to think about it in that sense, right? You got to think about it in. I'll give you another really good example. It's known, right, and this is something that can change with time if there's new evidence or whatever.
Hmm.
But right now, when we think about the first slave rebellion in the Americas, the most renowned one is in 1520, December 25th, 1521. The Wolofs, right, that were in the colony of Santo Domingo. Christopher Columbus's son, this time not his grandson,
Hmm.
was the slave master of this hacienda, and these people who were Wolofs, right, that were natives of parts of Senegal and Mali, they rebelled on Christmas Day. Very ingenious. They were like, okay, all the Christians at the time, Christian meant Spanish, and usually white, they're all drunk on wine and it's Christmas time and they're like, jumping for joy. So this is the time to do it. And they rebelled and they killed people on the hacienda and they became Maroons. And their ethnicity was Wolof and Mandinga. That's important because we're talking about 1521, right? If you go back in time, in the mid 1400s, the Wolof and the Mandinga, and even in the early 1500s, they were on top. They were the ones selling people across the Sahara into Spain and Morocco, the people on the coast, right? So what happens is you have the Portuguese used the malice where when they started coming down the coast, they said to the people on the coast who were being sold across the Sahara, they were like, hey, you guys are being sold, and these people are raiding you with horses, because that's how they did it. They used to raid villages with horses, because
Yeah.
horses are not native to West Africa, so they were being imported consistently across the Sahara. And when the Portuguese got to like the societies on the coast, like the Banyul and like the Biafada, they were like, hey, we'll give you guys horses and we'll give you guys this and stuff if you can capture the guys in the interior that were selling your people. They were like, oh, with pleasure.
Dame a caballo, lo vamos ahora.
And
Yeah.
and this is part of the psychology of how the Wolof in Santo Domingo rebelled, because these are people who are coming in and they're not. These are not. I mean, some of them were farmers, but a lot of these people. This is like basically if you put CEOs into slavery, like they're gonna be carrying and calling every high system. They're gonna be pretty pissed off. So the Wolofs in Santo Domingo that were rebelling, they were coming in. These were people who were on top in that society, right? In that part of West Africa, and basically, you have a flip of script, right? Where now they're the ones.
Structure.
The power structure changes, right? And of course, that doesn't mean that the Portuguese didn't take advantage to their own. They weren't just like like hee hee hee, like little. They weren't just like passive aggressive. The Portuguese and the Spanish and every other European society coming into West Africa was aggressive. But when it started out, they didn't have the power. And I always see it like this, right? A lot of people, they kind of have this idea of slavery as being like everybody was chilling, in Port Elmina in Ghana playing dominoes and stuff, and then all of a sudden, like these people in metal hoods started coming in and just like grabbing people.
Conquistadores came through and started. No era.
That's not what happened at all. This is frankly, I think it's disrespectful to our African ancestors, because we're coming from a society of very strong, organized, and complex people, right? Societies.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a trade. It wasn't, people weren't stolen, people were traded, right? And this was a trade between powerful societies in coastal West Africa, right? With a powerful society at the time, which was the Portuguese, with the Vatican's money, has a lot of money, and
still does.
Yeah. and that's basically no, and that's how you have that start, right? Mm-hmm. So this is how you have. This is part of the rebellion. I mean, if you look at this, actually, and some of you guys might know this, there's even a documentary, like a drama docu, where it's called A Prince Among Slaves, right? And that's basically a story, which is a real story, about a man from a Fulani man from Futa Jalon in Guinea, who him and his crew, they were raiding these non-Islamic people called the Jalonkes. And to make a long story short, they were raiding other people. They couldn't capture them. The other people caught them and sold them to the English. They got ambushed.
Gerald, you mentioned Africans and the Spaniards. So if I mention the Libertos, can you lead us anywhere with that?
The Libertos?
Yeah.
But what?
Isn't that they worked with the Spaniards? They were like the first people to land in like PR with the Spaniards, as far as the African.
But Libertos.
Am I saying it wrong? Am I saying it?
You are. I get it now. Libertos.
Libertos.
No?
Labertos. Right. Labertos.
Libertos. I think you did. I think you mean Libertos.
They were the first to land with the conquistadors in Puerto Rico and stuff like that.
Can you tell me a little more about them, and then maybe I can.
I don't have much. I just wrote it in my notes. I was just trying to.
Before we get into that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just watching the show, I'm your host, Mr. A, with my partner,
Sally Sasson.
And this is the set 6145. Tonight we have the incomparable, the informative, if you would. This gentleman is just giving out so much information at one time. It's hard to keep up, but I hope everybody's paying attention. Mr. Gerald Alexander Lopez Castellanos, and I hope I'm doing his name justice.
Castellanos.
See, I wanted to get that pronunciation right. He is taking us on a journey through history, if you would. And there's so many different things. This onion is getting peeled back, and so many layers are coming about. But I think that I think everybody should really pay attention to all the little details of how religion and power structures are playing a part in how things are happening at this time. You keep hearing, I'm hearing races of people that, I don't know if you've heard of them before, so he's mentioned quite a few that I'm like, oof, but I wanted to ask him about the Maroons, because I know the Maroons also inhabited Jamaica. And I forget the woman's name. I think her name was Queen. Anybody in the room know Queen Nanny? Queen Nanny. I think she was the first. I forget what part of Africa to go into Jamaica, and she was a Maroon. If somebody can chime in the room and let me know if I'm correct, Queen Nani. I'm saying Nani because I'm thinking about Pooh Nani. It's Queen Nanny, and she's from Africa. But I want to ask. Mira para
He's
allá.
about to give you guys a history lesson too.
Woofa. I wanted to ask you, Alex, the Maroons that you speak of, ultimately, are those the Maroons that come to inhabit Jamaica at some point?
Maroon is a broad term.
Okay.
So Maroon is just anybody at the time, cimarrón, which is where Maroon comes from, a person who ran away, right, from any type of society,
right,
that was they were being enslaved. So Maroon is also a little bit romantic. It's like there's like a romanticism to it, right? Romantizado, because when people think of Maroons, they're like, oh, they're just free people, kind of just hanging out. But it is some harsh shit. I mean, there's a book by Esteban Montejo called El Cimarrón, and it's also in English, I believe. And he's one of the last Maroons in Cuba. It's a really good book to read, and he talks about his experiences and all the troubles he had to go to, and everything that he had to do in order to survive. Right, he had to hide from people and like eat things he didn't want to eat. You know, it's a rough thing to do. People don't do it because they like to do it. But the Maroons in Jamaica they're part of a series of Maroons in the whole West Indies that were popping up because people were obviously not happy with being in that situation, right? So you have people who were facilitating Maroonage as well as participating in it because it's a whole network of people.
Right.
Like, for example, in as far as I know, in Santo Domingo, in the colony, there was a custom where the free people who were roaming around would sometimes help the Maroons, right? Okay. And there was one thing that's it's a bit patriarchal, but it used to happen a lot back then. It was that Maroons would often making it into like a catch-22 situation. They would steal black women from haciendas. They were like, "Viene conmigo o te queda aquí." You know, and it was like, wow. But it happened a lot. It's actually very mentioned that they would, because that was one of the complaints, because people were seen as property, right? The way that the Spanish would word it was, los cimarrones bajaban y se robaban las negras, right? Stealing as if they were property, but so the Maroons are all interconnected in their thirst for freedom.
Right.
But the way that Maroons in these societies behave is different because it depends on what was happening, right? So the Maroons in Jamaica, they're dealing with a strong investment power structure. They're dealing with British that have a whole lot of money. They're very organized. They're good with their numbers. And they are not trying to let go. So they had to fight in so many different ways to kind of, until the British gave up on them, And I don't know all the details of Nani. But I could tell you some of those Maroons that were there are descendants of people back from when Jamaica was Spanish.
Wow.
So some Maroons are Jimenez in those time periods, Gomez. And some of them might have Spanish surnames, and it has a lot to do with that society, right? But in the context of Santo Domingo, where it's different, is because of the abandonment that I mentioned earlier. It means that these Maroons came into treaties where basically the Spanish said, you know what, you guys come down, you go to church, and you pay, what you have to pay, like to the Catholic Church, and we'll leave you alone as long as you don't keep in the mountains and stuff. And they were like, you know what, that's better than being here eating, like weird, versions of yuca that are not really all that good in the mountains, and ñames that are a little rough. They were like, we'll take it, and they will come down. Right, and that doesn't mean that they're punks, right? Because these people were trying to live. These people were trying to make the best for themselves and their family. And there was also some kind of like highlighting back what we talked about before. There was some inter-clan and pan-ethnic group things that were happening. For example, the Spanish raided a Maroon village in the 1600s in, if I remember correctly, part of La Vega, And when they did, they said, how come there's only you guys here, the Biafala people? Where are the rest of the Maroons? And they literally said, we kicked out the Angolas because they're bad luck.
Wow.
And because they're traitors. That's what they said. So it's not a surprise that in Dominican etymology today, there's a saying. A lot of people don't say it anymore. This is the older people. If you want to say that you're not stupid, you say, yo no soy de Angola, no. Yo no soy de Angola. Right?
I'm going to keep that one.
Yeah. A lot of weird traditions we're learning here.
And this is not unique to the Dominican context. For example, in Haiti, Congo is a person who's stupid. A Congo?
Congo?
Yeah. Congo is, you call somebody a Congo, you're calling them stupid. You know? And it's not because the Congos had any type of challenges with being smart. You know, they were part of a huge, very organized society. But it has, that's a whole other complex, you know, thing to do, you know?
Wow.
Now, the way that the Maroons behaved had a lot to do with the way that. Hold on, let me. Give me like you guys talk for like 30 seconds. I'm gonna bring her back up.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm telling you, this is everywhere. I don't know if it's snoozola for you, but I'm enjoying this a lot because there's so many different things that are just coming out, right? Like hearing about how these societies functioned and how they dealt with one another. And can you imagine how fucking barbaric it must have been back then?
Oh, I'm sure. No rules, no laws.
Yeah, like
fake rules, fake laws.
Yeah, we're living on our Caribbean island, you know, eating our juca. You know, we got the rotisserie puerco going. Everything's all good. Oh, there's some shit with white people on it. Let's go see what they want. You know, they start murdering all the men in the village, you know, raping the women, killing. Wow. I got a little harsh there. Oh, wait, hold on. There you go. You muted.
My bad. All right.
There you go. So let me ask you this. So we have a lot of understanding of what it was like and what the structures of societies that seemed to be somewhat fragile by days were like back then, right? So when does the Middle Passage start developing, and when do they start bringing people to the Americas? Like, what happens in Europe that changes, like, you know, because I know Spain was here and, you know, everybody was trying to stake their claim in the Americas, but, you know, can you sort of like point us or talk us through how that all comes to be?
Yeah, so it all really starts with like and remember this, people back then, there was no Twitter, there was no like, oh, I'm filming you. So back then people wrote letters, and because they wrote letters, we have a society where people could exaggerate, right, things. And the first thing the Spanish did in the Caribbean when they got there, and even in Cartagena in Colombia, is they started to exaggerate how many Indians were actually left. Right?
Is that why Spanish people exaggerate all the time now?
Oh,
The boricuas, mira, tú no sabes, ay.
Yo, he's on home run. Esto se fue.
Mil pie.
I'm at the door already and you're taking a shower. But they started exaggerating for political reasons about the amount of the natives that were on the island, and they started to use that as a way to get licencias. They had to get licenses. This is a very organized. Slavery is a corporation,
right? Since
inception,
right?
And because it is, these people were asking for licenses from the first people who were coming in. You have different layers of Africans. I'll summarize them like in 1 minute. And basically, slavery starts with the Ladinos, right? The Ladinos are the people who were traded across the Sahara by the Moors and the West African empires into Spain and Portugal. And they were raised in Spain. They were Catholics. They spoke perfect Spanish. And these people were the ones being sold first into the island because they were the ones that were already in that condition in Spain. So it was like, oh, you're here in Sevilla. You're going to get on this boat and you're going to go to the colony of Santo Domingo and to the colony of Jamaica and whichever colony at the time. But The difference is this: after that, there was a more direct connection with West Africa, right? So instead of having these people who were coming across the Sahara into North Africa, into Spain, into the Caribbean, which is a whole crazy route, you had now direct contacts, right, with the people who were the Portuguese were befriending in West Africa, were trading people from the interior, like the Wolof, right, and later on the Angolans. This was happening there as well, and they were being sold, and it became into an increment of need by the Spanish society. So what they started doing was they started to do all these plantations, especially sugarcane started to become big at the time. And in some colonies, that was the only time sugarcane was big. Some colony, like the colony of Santo Domingo, it's never been a sugarcane colony. It's a big mistake a lot of people make. Is they think that when you think Caribbean, you think sugarcane. There's always been sugarcane everywhere, like like getting hit with sugarcane. That's not what was happening. At the beginning, yes, in some societies kept it going. Other societies didn't keep it going. So, to make a long story short, this is something that starts to increment with time. Right, so 1500s, 1600s. Is more important, especially when the English start to get involved at the 1700s and the French. Then you have all these European powers like slicing and dicing West, Central, and Southeast Africa for peoples and importing them into. And I'll tell you this: not everybody. This is a tricky one. Not everybody who made it from Africa in that condition of being enslaved made it across the Atlantic.
I'm glad you pointed that out. What kind of numbers are we talking about? I know you're not going to be exact because we can't necessarily, but
they were dying from what, like measles, mumps, stuff like that.
Wait, who was?
Where were they dying from?
Like
the coming across on that trip.
Anything. I mean, at the very beginning, let's put it like this: a lot of people, when they think of, let's get the right context. When they think about people being brought over into the Caribbean and into the Americas, you're thinking about like these big boats and like everybody like sardines. That was the commercial trips. Most slavery in the Caribbean, especially, and in coastal South America, if you're talking about Cartagena and parts of Venezuela, was illegal. It means you had these Portuguese men on a small boat going across the Atlantic Ocean.
Like like an oversized skiff.
With 10 people.
Diablo. Oh my God.
And these were illegal trips. They didn't have to pay no taxes. So they were risking, they didn't care because they were coming in, and what they would do is, there were two things happening. For example, there's an episode, and this is in the same book that I mentioned here. Right?
Tell everybody the title of that.
Yeah, pause that.
The Rise of the Transatlantic Slave Trade in Western Africa by Toby Green.
1300s to 1589. Am I reading that correctly?
1589.
So they mentioned a little bit of that in that book. There's another one by David Wheaton.
Okay.
And it has to do with I don't have the title right now. I'll give it to you guys later. But that one deals specifically with the Spanish Caribbean and in the early days in the 1500s. And there's an episode where you have a ship coming illegally into Santo Domingo, and the ship has 2 Portuguese men, and it's got about 15 West Africans, 3 of which are free people. They're not there to be sold. They're there for the trip. Because they're partners of the Portuguese, and they're just going there to sell the people who they captured, and they're just going for the ride.
It's Carnival. It's a cruise ship.
They literally went in, and that's an episode. So now the interesting part is that was very common. People were coming in small boats at a very, very high rate, like thousands and thousands of small boats, selling people illegally, right? And this means that there's never records of these people. So if I looked at numbers, if I looked at the numbers of Santo Domingo, Puerto Rico is about what, a fourth of maybe the size of the Dominican Republic. And if you look at the numbers in slavevoyages.org for Puerto Rico, it's higher than Santo Domingo. Not because they brought more people, but because there were more documented people. Because a lot of people who came into the colony of Puerto Rico at the time, we're coming in the 1800s when everybody had numbers and ledgers and things were organized. But the Santo Domingo colony received a lot of people illegally because it's an abandoned colony. There's no oversight. Nobody cares about the colony, and people are coming in from all these directions specifically into the coast that were far away from Santo Domingo, the capital. So the further away you could be from Santo Domingo, the capital, the more you could do things illegally.
Right. The lawlessness is greater on that side of the island.
And this also translates into something else, that the free people who started to call themselves morenos, right? Because this was a legal Spanish term. Negro in the time period meant you were a slave, and then you became a moreno once you attained freedom. Wow. And these morenos were moving into the interior at a very high rate. So most of these Black Creole societies and West African societies that were coexisting in Santo Domingo were living in the interior, right? So places like North Los Minas, Villamella, places like La Vega, places like Cotuí, places, that were San Juan de la Maguana, which is deep in the interior. This is why, that's another mistake a lot of people make. A lot of people, when they think about the blackness of the Caribbean, they think about it like a salt-rimmed martini or something, where like everything is coastal. That's not true. It's not true for Santo Domingo.
Right.
In Santo Domingo, most of the blackness historically was concentrated in the interior. Why? Because on the coast, especially Santo Domingo, and even the city of Bani, most of the Canarians and the people who were more on the white side, they were living on the coast because they had access to, they had the privilege and the access to trade. So,
shit does not change. You see these people, they learned their fucking lesson. They're like, we're not waiting for more boats to come get us. In Lo Blanqui, they were like, oh, we want to live by the beach, like they do now everywhere we inhabit anyway.
So the interior thing is important because it means that a lot of these free people, the morenos, they were living in the interior, and this is where they were able to be basically less watched, because all these laws that applied for free people, they could not apply to people who were not being watched, right? So you could have your palo drum, you could have your, whatever you wanted, basically, because you weren't being watched for the most part, right? Unless you were in a city. So this is why in a lot of places the campesinado is more African, right? The people in the countryside. That changes in modern times because of capitalism. People move to the cities. Totally different story. But back then, that's basically how it worked. So, for example, you had one of the things you had happen was in that time period is you had the free people. Basically, they would work for people who were ex-slave masters, but they have to get paid, right? Because they're free. You can't just be like, come here and no. So, for example, when Puerto Plata was built, they could not, in Santiago, they could not find any slave to rent, because you could rent enslaved people in that time period.
From
if you were slave masters. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because you're property, so you could be rented out. You could be rented out. So they couldn't find anybody willing to rent anybody out. So they had to go to Cotuí and into La Vega to find free people and pay them, right? And they did. They found them. They paid them, but then the conditions they were working under and the food that they were being given was not good enough. So they got up and left. They built like half the city, and they said, you know what? I'm not getting paid for this bullshit. And enough. And they got up and left in Puerto Plata. So these are free people, right? It doesn't mean that it's not a utopia, because they're still in the margins of society. But this is where the term moreno starts to become very important. Because if you would call somebody at the time who was free, if you would call them a negro, you were inciting that they were still in bondage. And if you said that to somebody's child who nobody knew their parents, you could even potentially endanger them into being put back into slavery. Wow. So it's a dangerous thing in that time period to call somebody negro or negra, right? Because it had a really big implication on your status.
Can I ask you a question? Because we're talking a lot about connotations and speech, and working conditions and people migrating to different parts to sort of avoid certain situations. It sounds like overall, everywhere you went, the trade of humans was basically everywhere. Now, what I want to ask you is, when, at any point in time, do the rebellions start? Because as I understand it, people can only be pushed but so far. And I'm one to not believe for one iota that we're not taught any of this stuff in history. These are things that what I like to call elective classes, right? Or study time on your own that you come to find out.
Yeah.
But when do the rebellions start to take place, or if at all?
No, they've been taking place since the colony formed, right? In 1504, there were already people running away, and the Indians in the island, the Tainos, were the same. They were not staying there for the fun. People were always rebelling, consistently, right? And if they weren't rebelling as Maroons, they were rebelling as free people and moving away from the capital. In those time periods, they were like, "I'm not going to be part of this because you're telling me that I can't." There were laws that forbade in that time period. If you were a black woman, right, even if you were free, you couldn't sell certain cuts of pork.
What?
You had to sell chicharrón and morcillas and the parts that the Spanish thought were worse, which they're not. They have a lot of vitamins in them. I love chicharrones, and that's where all the good stuff is.
Good protein.
Not just proteins, but all the vitamins are in the innards of the animal.
Really?
All the good stuff, yeah. All the B12, all the zinc, that's where it is. The Spanish, in that racialization of people, started to think that, the white meat is better. It's not true.
Man, they even racialized food?
Even food. So, in order to avoid that, right, people moving to the interior could eat whatever they wanted, and they could sell whatever they wanted, as long as they weren't being watched, right? So that created this society of... So what I'm trying to get at with this is that it's the Moreno identity, and the Moreno identity became so strong that if you listen to the oldest music in the island, which is palo, right, and the most continuously played, the etymology that they always use is moreno and morena, right? And Ernest, I sent you a video just to kind of highlight that. I sent you a video via YouTube. I don't know if you could share your audio.
I can share my audio. Where'd you send it to?
I sent it to your Facebook.
My Facebook.
But you will not find a single palo song that when it refers to somebody's skin color isn't saying morena and moreno,
Is that similar to like Puerto Rico, the bomba music, or?
Yes, it's related to bomba in the sense that it's a West African derived music, but it's been in the island. The difference is that it's played on taller drums and it has a different timing, but otherwise it's very much like a West African descended music.
Right.
And I'll tell you this: people weren't going around and saying like, "Oh, this part of the music is kind of Spanish. I'm not going to include it." Mm-mm. The way West Africans were such music genius, still are music geniuses, that they were like, "Oh, the Spanish form of singing, or the French form of dancing, or whatever. I like how that looks. It goes with this rhythm," and they would include it. So when you think about palo songs, they're singing in cuartetos like the Spanish sing, so they're singing like it's like four phrases. So you can go ahead and play that.
So what are we exactly listening to here?
So this is a palo song from my cousins in San Francisco de Macorís. Okay. And the title, the chorus is just "Ay, ay, la morena." That's all they sing. I mean the chorus.
All right, let's take a listen. Doesn't sound like bachata at all, right?
could probably send you, honestly, obviously we have a time limit, but I could send you at least 25 songs that the theme is either La Morena or in the singers, because this is the identity of the people in the island who were of predominant African descent, right? This was the identity that they have always had, and it's a central theme. I mean, I'm not saying this is, again, with all of this, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people who use the term negra or negro, because societies change and they evolve. So, for example, in Dominican society, we have come to acquire the term, especially after salsa, from New York City coming to Santo Domingo, and these New Yorican, Dominican York, Cuban Dominican, and all of this happening. It's bringing the term negro and negra into the island, where people are starting to use it ever since the 70s. You hear in some of the bachatas sometimes they bring it, but even the bachatas are mostly the oldest bachatas. They say morena, moreno.
The reason I'm sorry to interrupt, but the reason why I said that is because, you know, I've said this story like 1,000 times, but I've gotten into conversations with people at times, and they want to immediately deny the connectivity, if you would, the connective tissue that bonds all of us in some way, shape, or form to anything black, which to me, it makes no sense. It's obvious. Y ya se fue. Está cuidando la nena.
Got Domino's, his turn to slip.
Oh, yeah. Put down that 6 and stop playing.
Capicu.
But what I was saying is that, you know, I've had these discussions before where people want to immediately deny anything that connects them to blackness, right? And like, if I showed like my father's side of the family, if I showed you guys my grandmother's picture, what do they call that? Pelo quieto. My grandmother has pelo quieto, and she has dark skin. Damn, and she has that no, dude, like everything. You can see the connection there.
Well, I was gonna say, to kind of like go off what you're saying. It's all about, you got to remember, we're all colonized,
right?
And we all have different things that are Eurocentric in all of the diaspora, right? So, for example, in Jamaica, skin bleaching is big. It's not so big in the DR, you know. Not that people don't, you know, use an umbrella sometimes, but they don't bleach. It's a different society. Right. So one of the big things is that when you're talking to people who are older, who are part of this system, you got to give them mango spoons,
right?
When you talk to them, right? So you got to bring things, you got to put things in the context of like, these are the things that, this is exactly what this means, and this is why it means that. So, for example, with a lot of Dominicans and a lot of our family in the Caribbean, you basically say, wait a minute, but you eat this, and this comes from this, right? And this is how you can equate to, right? But it's not about, because you got to be careful to not be conflictive.
Right.
If you're telling somebody, tú lo que quieres, tú no quieres saber, then it's like, also, you're not getting the information from that person, because they could be telling you something that might blow your mind, but you're ignoring it if you're coming at it from that type of perspective. Like, I'll give you an example of like the mindset. For example, one of my political aunts, right, is from Pimentel, right, in the Dominican Republic. And one day we were drinking, and we were like, I was talking about African origins and all of that, as I get to sometimes when I start drinking. And she's like, oh, Africano. And she literally told me this. She was like, el abuelo mío me decía que los britos de Salcedo eran una cosa así, esa vaina que tú dijiste, africano, eso mismo. Eso es lo que decía ese viejo. So she knows her grandfather used to say that his family was African, of African descent, or recently of African origin.
Right.
And she knows that. She doesn't know what the term African means because she only went to 6th grade.
Wow.
So you can't come at somebody who only had a 6th grade education and try to like be like, you're saying this wrong, you're doing this wrong. Right. You got to come with an attitude that is, you're going to learn, because nobody knows everything. And B, you got to know how to approach a person, right? In who's in that part of the society and who has a certain education level, because that's one of the big things in a lot of our countries. Unfortunately, because we're, people that are neglected sometimes since the 1500s, our level of education is very low. So, for example, Santo Domingo, and I'm not, we have a lot of smart people. Most of my friends that are developers in here, they're Dominican, they deal with computers. But in the island as a whole, our level of reading for the 6th grade in 2019 was the second worst in Latin America. Right? So when you're dealing in a society where a good amount of the people are undereducated, you have to know how you approach people. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Wow.
I want to ask him, why is that? Financial,
Yeah, it's economics. The Spaniards are there now still. All those most of the resorts Spain owned. I mean, there's some as from my last trip,
European
people. Yeah. What is it? Go ahead, so ask your question.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so under developed? The economics of it, as far as the teaching.
So when we talk about why Santo Domingo as a colony and then the Dominican Republic is so undereducated, it has a lot to do with there's a double-edged sword to freedom, right? So we had the highest amount of free people than any other colony in the Caribbean, right? And because of that, we had a lot of black farmers who were free, right? And when you're free and you can farm and you can do it, you're self-sufficient, you're mostly focused on your production locally, right? And on top of that, because there are laws that disallow you to trade, like for example, if you were free, you were not really a full citizen. One of my cousins, Baba Alex, was telling me this the other day, is that free people in the island didn't necessarily have citizenship. They had to apply for it, right? And the only thing the citizenship was good for was for trading and leaving the country to Europe. So when you're in that situation, you're focused on campesinado and self-sufficiency, right? And when you're doing that, you're not necessarily focused on the external world. You're focused on, like, this is me. I mean, the Dominican Republic was, up until Trujillo's time, it was like 90% rural. Most people lived deep in the countryside. In Yamasá, and I read this in a book, I have the link, I haven't found the actual source, like the first primary source, but it is said in a book that people in Yamasá, Monte Plata were still filing their teeth, like the Baka people of Central Africa, up until the 1920s.
Wow.
Damn.
They were filing their teeth in Yamasá.
They said it's the roaring 20s. We could stop this now.
Wow.
So the interesting thing is that, like, you have a society where, because of the self-sufficiency, you now create a deficiency because you're not part of the participating rest of the world. And the politicians, right? So when we talk about the politicians, starting with Trujillo and going to Balaguer, etc., especially after Balaguer, the education starts to going to descend and descending and getting worse and worse and worse and worse, right? And it's to the point where, like, because people are stealing so much money politically, that there's almost nothing dedicated to education, and people have the bare minimum, kind of like a chassis. Like when they build a bridge in the island, they say, give me $1 million, and they build it with $250,000,
right.
And then the bridge breaks in 10 years.
Right.
And that's the same thing we have with the education. Yeah. So the corruption, first we were very self-sufficient, and it was like this worked for a long time, but then being part of the world, you guys talk for like 30 seconds. Give me 30 seconds.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, this is a doozy. I think we're gonna, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna probably go another 15 minutes, and then we're gonna end the show. But yeah, we're gonna wrap it up. But I think what's in order is we have 32 people in the room, and everybody's calling for parts 2, 3, and 4.
While we have this time, hit the like, hit subscribe, share it with your peoples. Thank you for being here.
Yes, we appreciate everybody coming in. Please go to our YouTube page, like and subscribe. And now
we don't stop, babies and all, baby.
That's it. We keep the show going.
Exactly.
Is that your daughter?
Yep.
Wow! Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Mira, ahí está llamando otra
en la televisión.
It's a busy house.
But listen, Alex, I was just telling my partner that we're gonna draw the show to an end. However, with all the people that we have in the room right now, everybody's calling for parts 2, 3, and 4. So what I'd like to put on the table is a proposal of having you on the show again at your leisure, because you're a busy man and you're a family man, and we understand that. But there's so much more that we'd like to talk about, and we definitely have to get this on the board, because I'm sure after the show we're going to be getting direct messages. What about this? What about that? You guys missed this and that, and blah 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 blah. And then we can revisit for a second, and maybe even a third installation, because again, in our conversation, our preamble, when we first spoke, you and I both said we could stay on the phone for like 3 hours just talking about this stuff. And there's so much more that I want the audience to be exposed to. So, with that being said, can we sort of count you in?
No pressure.
Tentatively, we can tentatively.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, we can tentatively count you in. I can reach out. We can try to work out a schedule to have you back on the show.
I'm definitely very interested, and I would love to kind of like, just to make it a little more consistent, is like to pick a topic or two.
Yes.
Because I can easily, because this is the issue, right? This is what makes it. Hold on a second.
Okay.
I'm gonna stay quiet. I'm gonna stay
quiet
quiet right about now.
So, this is the thing, right? This is the thing that's happening is that you have this, all these topics interconnect with each other, right? And because they interconnect with each other, it's impossible to not connect them and silo into a different thing, right?
It's splinters.
So because they are, like, for example, like, I'm talking about that identity, and then we're talking about how the music has those words in it, right? And then if we get into the music, then I can, I'm definitely very interested. I would definitely love to touch these topics in a direct sense, right?
More
because
concise.
More concisely, just to basically, like, for example, I did write down at the beginning I was going to focus quite a bit on the Moreno identity and how that comes about, and how there are like documents, where people are proclaiming it.
She heard Moreno. She's like, no, a botella. Mira pa allá.
Honey, take the baby.
So, so yeah, the interesting thing, right, is that we have to have like this mind is, right, is that these topics, they even though my focus is a bit more on the Dominican Republic, they apply to a lot of different places, right? But this is always my philosophy: is if you're gonna learn about a country, a culture, an ethnicity, a society, you have to really focus on it, because there's a lot of difference. A lot of us get kind of like, we get really happy and we hug each other and we're like, oh yeah, we're all the same, and we get into this thing, but then there's like a word that says juntos pero no revueltos, right? So it means that we can be together and we can be cousins and friends and brothers and sisters, but we have to also learn a lot and respect each other's differences, right?
Right, of course.
And it takes, a lot of times it takes studying, because, for example, what applies in Santo Domingo or in Dominican Republic, it doesn't apply in Cuba. Like, for example, if you call some Afro-Cubans, if you call an Afro-Cuban Moreno, they might not like it. I have a friend and she's like, don't call me that. She's like, and they have their reason for it. They have their historical, and I could do a 30 minutes on that, on why Afro-Cubans don't like the term Moreno, right? And why their ethnical process is totally different from the colony of Santo Domingo. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking these are two Spanish colonies, same shit. These are two English colonies, Jamaica and Barbados, same thing. No, it doesn't work like that.
No,
there's a lot of differences. I mean, just think about the differences between Trinidad and Barbados. There's so much more East Indians in Trinidad, right? That changes the whole relationship dynamic.
And even Andrew, you look Trinidadian right now. You can even be Guyanese.
Yeah,
for real.
No, I've gotten all sorts of, but that's what I'm saying, that like,
what's your you said you're a genetics guy, so what's your background?
My background as in like my genetics.
Origins.
So I have, depending on the test, it's about the same thing. I'm about 40% West African, right? about 5% North African, 9% Native American, and 46% South European.
Wow. Slavery is a doozy.
Oh, wait. And 0. This is when it's funny. 0.2% South Asian, as in East Indian.
Wow.
And the reason why a lot of people are like,
no trading.
I probably came with I love that stuff. I probably came with them. But the reason, I'm not gonna get into the whole genetics in this episode, but all that stuff, like, is, if you can, this is the way that I see it. Everybody has the freedom to investigate. If you feel something is not true, or if you feel something is in doubt, you go ahead and you do your work, and you try to stimulate and replicate these things, because a lot of these sciences, whether we're talking about history when I'm giving you all these things, or we're talking about genetics, you can go and repeat these things. This is why, for example, science journals are open access, so you can download the information that they used, and you can try to replicate the experiment. And if you prove something wrong, you came out with a science paper.
Wow.
You know, that's how it works. And same thing with history. With history, I could be saying one thing, and if somebody discovers something else that's totally contradictory, that might be the case, and that'll be the new truth. And there's no such thing as truth. That's absolute.
That's, you know what, that's a tough thing to say in the environment that we're in right now. This, because a lot of people are definitely in this realm of, no, truth isn't truth no more. Facts aren't really facts, so a little shaky ground. But
all I have to say to that is, like I said, if anybody feels that something is, like, for example, with DNA, if you feel something is off, then you got to just basically do your own, and not just like go on Google and Wikipedia. Like, you got to do the same science work that the people who are doing it do.
Maybe get a second opinion, like doctors, right?
Yeah, no, and do your actual, like, science work, And the same thing, like I said, history is a living, breathing thing. History is not static. So there are stories. I mean, I'll tell you like this, right? History is stories by people, right? And some of them are written down. Some of them are not written down. I'll give you an example, and I guess this is part of, like, the closing. My family in San Francisco de Macorís, my De Jesus line, I remember that I started to connect with a lot of them more so, like, in the last 10, 15 years. And one of the shocking things to me, I was like, oh, so, tell me more about, like, the family, like, where did they come from, like, especially that last name. And they said, no, el viejo que llegó aquí llegó encojonado, llegó amarrado en una jaula. And what they're basically saying is, y llegó arigoneado was the word that they said, which means that they're basically saying their ancestor with the last name de Jesus arrived into San Francisco de Macorís in bondage, and he was pissed off, obviously. And in his story that he passed down in that family, he was in a cage, which in the slave ships you would be tied to an iron part of the ship. And when he came, he had a nose ring right here, and his ears were full of rings, of gold rings. And that family, it's 2020.
Yeah, dude.
And they kept that. That's not in a history book. If I write it, that's about it. But otherwise, it's not in no history book. So history isn't only things you can Google. You talk to your family.
Yes.
Talk to your elders, especially, because they're full of history.
I think younger people especially, is something that they've given up on. Our elders, especially, on our island, they've given up on the elders, and it's a shame because we've lost a lot of that history. And not only that, and I'll say it again, a lot of the orgullo that we had at one time, like I remember as a kid, that the island had. We had more respect, we had more pride, we loved our people more. It's not the same anymore.
But that's here too.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying what he just said spoke to that very thing. Speaking to the elders, they don't care. No, they want to know about abuelo and abuela. Like, you're missing out on so much history, things that you just didn't know about your family and your lineage. You miss out on it because they've given up on it, and it's a shame.
And it's really like a lot of the burning questions people have. A lot of times, these people can answer them, right? So, for example, you have I'll give you a funny one. A lot of people, and this is going to be a whole nother topic, because that's like a whole topic, is the term indio. right? In the Dominican society, which now in modern days basically means somebody who's mixed race or brown. It has nothing to do with native people. That's a big
Right.
mistake a lot of people make.
Really?
It's not. It has nothing to do with it. Not even, and not even legally. When in Trujillo's time, I'll show you this in the next episode. You have people coming in from, for example, Barbados as immigrants, and it says color indio, raza africana,
What?
right? So indio does not mean that the person thinks that it has nothing to do with Indian.
Not
As a
in-
matter of fact,
Damn, man.
as a matter of fact, it sounds.
I was ready to save on my taxes and shit.
So, so, so the thing is this, right? And also the term is old, right? And like for
Right.
example, in 1795, there was a maroon that was going around, but he wasn't a good guy. He was, according to the people at least who were reporting him, they say he was a mass murderer. He was like a Jack the Ripper maroon version.
Whoa.
And they described him. They said they said that he was from Ivory Coast because of the type of things he had in his pot. He had like bird feathers, and he had some things that identified him as somebody from the Ivory Coast. And they said he's light skinned, he's Indian color.
Wow.
He's not a dark skinned man. Because people were describing, like a mugshot, like trying to describe.
Yeah.
This is in 1795. This is way before Trujillo. Wow. But I'll tell you this, to finish that off, is that, for example, I talked to my grandmother one time, and that side of the family, my paternal grandmother, they have an Indian identity, but in the sense of actual Taino Native Americans, right? Not in the sense of like, and she told me, she's like, I asked her, so, ¿cuál es la diferencia entre una persona de color indio y un indio? And she says, no, mijo, eso es muy diferente. You know, this is, she says, color indio es cualquiera. Anybody could be color indio. That means brown. She says, pero raza de indio es otra cosa. You know, and she says, no habían casi gente in her time period that were raza de indio. She could point to like a couple of families, very select, right? And not even them, but like their great-great-grandparents. And she was like, these people, they're Indian race. What you're calling color indio, that's like anybody who's brown. But that's not the same thing. That doesn't mean you're an actual
Indigenous.
native. And one word a lot of people in the countryside used to use in that time to describe somebody with native features was not indio, but guajiro in the Dominican Republic.
Guajillo.
Guajiro.
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 Wow.
They were like, no, esa mujer es una guajira con el pelo así largo. You know, una guajira. But they didn't use the term indio.
Can you translate that? Guajira? What is that?
That's actually an Arawak word. It's a native word. I don't even know what it means, but I know that in
That's
some
the
other
terminology.
societies, in Cuba, they use the term guajiro. Mistakenly, people be like, it means war hero. Nothing to do with war hero. That's not true.
The Guajiro.
But you know, it's things like this. When you ask older people in your family, sometimes you can come to conclusions, and you can see why. Because people weren't crazy. Like, people didn't use terms to hurt themselves and all that. People are coming up with terms because these are terms that have a meaning, and they have I mean, to give you to kind of like give you one last thing on that topic. Even the topic of whiteness is different in every colony, in every island, and sometimes to every family, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's white to one Dominican family is not white to another Dominican family. It's fluid, right? And as a matter of fact, in Angola, there was a time period where if you were in coastal Angola and you wore shoes, you were considered a white man.
For
In the
wearing
1600s.
shoes.
For wearing shoes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if this does not motivate you to read or search or look into or come back to join us for part 2 with Mr. Andrew Castellanos.
Gerald.
I say, why did I say Andrew? It's Gerald. It's sorry, Gerald Alexander Lopez Castellanos.
Castellanos.
Yeah. If this doesn't motivate you to come back for this, why did I say Andrew? Yeah,
Said it a couple times too.
I did, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, where is it? If this doesn't motivate you to come back for part 2, I don't know what will. The information, the understanding, the way he can explain and put things together and bring, like I've said before, the connective tissue to put everything together is just amazing. And I'm honored, 1, and 2, I hope that you take us up on our invitation because I know I definitely want you back. I'm sure my partner does, and even the audience. You know, everybody is what they're saying, even 4 and 5.
I might have to go over there. We play some dominoes.
Yeah, for
eat.
real. Yo, yo traen la cerveza y la botella, and we'll do a lot.
Shots.
We do that.
So I wanna say thank you for coming on the show and giving us your time, most of all. And you and I will be in touch. We'll definitely make it more concise for the second part, if and when you're ready, so that we can give the people the information that they've been in the room asking for. And we'll make it even better the second go round. I really appreciate your time, for real.
Thank you. No, anytime, guys. Like I said, I'm a student of life, and anything to do with connect, and we all learn this.
We got to hit island to island, DR, Puerto Rico.
Yeah, we'll get it together. If you want, just please sit in the green room for like 2 or 3 minutes. Let us close out the show.
All right, cool.
Awesome.
All right, guys.
Ooh. Thank you,
buddy.
Man, I know it's tough. Right? But when you start, I don't know about you. When I start, why did I call him Andrew?
Old age. You did that a couple times. Andrew. I'm like, damn, did I miss his name? Like,
old age.
I know he had like 4 names though, so it was like
no,
my Andrew might have been in there somewhere.
No, but just listening to him talk and bring up the different topics, you know what I mean? Like you open one door and then he's like, oh, by the way, blah, 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 blah,
yeah, no, for sure.
And going down another.
I think we need outline, some type of structure, maybe next time.
But see, the conversation was supposed to be very what it turned into. Listen,
we'll have this behind the scenes.
The conversation was definitely geared towards going a different way, right? And it turned out to be this way. And the crazy part is that I wasn't even prepared for the way it turned out.
Yeah,
this definitely went left. But
son of my bitch.
All good. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you first and foremost for being here tonight with us, but we also want to let you know, go to the YouTube page, like and subscribe. We have anywhere from like 1,000 to 3,000 friends and followers between us, right? We're still at 215 subscribers on YouTube, which makes no sense.
Yeah. Everybody's in the Facebook page. We need that YouTube to go up.
Yes. Now, before we go, I want to make one announcement. This Wednesday at 7 p.m., we are going to be joined by Adrian Viajero Roman. This gentleman is a Boricua artist, and he's going to be coming to us to share his thoughts, his work, and most importantly, his children's book that he wrote inspired behind his daughter, called Caras Lindas.
Las Caras Lindas.
Las Caras Lindas?
I think so.
Okay. So Adrian was informed by issues of race, migration, and identity while exploring both the personal and historical memory of the two desperate worlds that he inhabits, the tropical landscape of Puerto Rico and the overpopulated cityscape of New York. So Adrian's he's been in the Smithsonian. He's been in a bunch of, big museums, featured in a bunch of big museums in New York City. But most importantly, his children's book is something we want to share with the audience. He's going to be bringing a lot of information and history that he's been inspired by from Puerto Rico. So I hope everybody can make it out for that. And yeah, we thank you all for joining us. Again, this Wednesday, we will be with Mr. Roman on the show. So come check us out. Go to the Facebook page, like and subscribe, and you'll get the updates for the live shows on Wednesdays and Sundays. So we out of here?
Yeah, man. Let's let Gerald go feed his babies. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see you soon.